Hello and welcome back to Down To The Tyre. Today I'm joined by the 2024 AIRTEC Motorsport Fiesta ST240 Champion in the amateur class. It's Henry Howarth. Growing up in Nottingham, Henry started karting at the age of 8, and he was intending on carrying on with karting in 2023, but he ended up entering the Jam Sport Racing Scholarship Competition and making the step up to racing cars. This year was his first year in the Senior Championship, so I caught up with Henry to talk all about his season. I hope you enjoy the episode.
So firstly, Henry, I want to go back to the start of your career. You grew up in Nottingham and you started karting at the age of 8. How did it kind of all begin for you?
So actually the first time I ever hopped in a kart was when I was 5 when we were actually living out in Australia. My dad, we spent 2 years out in Australia, and for a day we went to a kart circuit where they had tandem karts, so a parent could take their child out in a two-seater go-kart and go around the circuit with everybody else. And that's sort of where I fell in love with motorsport. And then when we came back to England and moved to Nottingham, and I was of the right age, I started indoor karting just sort of as like a bit of fun at the weekend, but sort of nothing super serious. It's just a fun time to do on a Sunday afternoon. And then COVID hit, and that sort of hindered what we were planning because I'd already done sort of 3 years by then before COVID hit, and we were sort of starting to think, oh, do we start looking at some more serious options? And then just COVID completely wiped that plan out realistically because all the local kart circuits shut down. No one was doing any academies. But after that previous karting experience and after COVID finished and everybody started opening up again, we looked to some more serious options. So we first looked at the Club 100 series, did a few test days at various circuits. It was really fun to hop in something slightly more powerful than the team sport karts. And then after that, we ended up getting our own Rotax kart, and we went round circuits and just doing club rounds, just sort of bedding myself in to karting because that's like the first proper serious car I drove. And then at the end of 22, after I'd done a year in Rotax, we found Jam Sport, which is where I'm currently racing with, and they held a Fiesta Junior scholarship. So at the end of 22, I did that. No car experience beforehand, just went into it thinking, let's see what team's like and how everybody sort of works well together, see what the car's like. And I managed to get through to the final round in my first ever time in car, so really pleased with that. Didn't win, but it was a really good learning curve for me and seeing where I need to improve, but where I'm also good at. Um, and then in 2023, we didn't really have a budget to do anything, so we ended up just doing a bit of testing here and there in the junior. And I also had GCSEs, so my parents were just like, you need to focus on that. We weren't really going to do much. We said, do one test day before GCSEs so you can sort of get it out your system, and then you crack down, do your GCSEs, and afterwards we can do a bit more testing. So after GCSE period, we went back, did another couple of test days in the junior, and ended up doing 2 rounds at the end of the season. So the first one was at Silverstone, and it wasn't a great weekend, to be honest. Qualifying started out well, good pace. So I was like top 10 first time in a race car weekend. But I was just stupid with track limits, and it just bumped me down to I think like around 18th. So wasn't the greatest start. And then to be fair, first race wasn't actually going too badly. I sort of made my way up to the top 10 sort of position before I got involved in an incident at Cops Corner. Ended with my rear right tyre being bent outwards, and that was just race done, which was an unfortunate first race and certainly a big learning curve for me. That first race, just like I'd never been in a scenario of a standing start or anything like that, so it was certainly a very new experience to me. Then it sort of gave a few doubts to me for the second race because it was only a 2 race weekend. And we went into the second race starting at the back again from that DNF in race one. And yeah, on the first lap, the gearbox went, meaning I had to retire. And I just rolled into the pit lane, and that was it. So it wasn't a great first weekend in cars, but we decided to give it another go. We went to the next round at Donington, which was very chaotic weekend. So the first, like, good qualifying, but the first race was actually cancelled because a car that had a big crash down Crane of Curves and rolled over. So they and we had an incident before that, so we had two red flags. So they just decided to scrap the race. We weren't going to continue. So again, not the greatest start to the weekend. Second race was actually probably the first good race for me. It was difficult because we didn't really know what conditions. It was raining just before the race, so it was still slightly greasy on the circuit. So we went out on the wet tires. They said do two green like formation laps before you grid up. And on the first lap, I saw there was starting to be a dry line, and I thought in 15 minutes this could very well dry out. And so I made the call, came into pit lane, went back onto the dry tires, and did a pit lane start. So everybody else went through turn one. There was about four or five cars in the pit lane with me. So we all went out after we saw the entire pack go through turn one. And then over the course of the race, I went from, I think it was like 25th to, I think, like 13th. So that was probably the first good race. And then at the end of the year, I was allowed to do the junior scholarship again. So I did that and came second in the scholarship, which was really good. And as part of the reward for coming second, I was given reduced team fees for next week, for the next season, which, and basically after that, we were sort of looking at options. Do we do another year of juniors, or do we make the call to go to seniors early? Because I was old enough to make the move. And in the end, we decided to go to the 240 category senior fiestas, which ended up being the right move for us. And yeah, it was sort of big learning curve going from karting to little testing a junior to going to 240 turbo slick fiesta. But no, I took to it really well, and this season has been a very positive one for me, ending up winning the Am Championship. So yeah, no, it's been a great year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned balancing education when you were doing your GCSEs. Nowadays, you're at Loughborough College doing the famous course that so many drivers do. We could sit here listing all day. I think the drivers who've done it in the past as well, and drivers who've gone on to be very successful. My previous guest, Chloe Grant, also spoke about it as well. Um, how has that kind of experience been for you studying that course, and what benefits do you think it's had for your career so far?
Yeah, no, certainly the past few months I've been there, it's certainly been a very different experience because of my age. I'd already done a year of A levels, so it's been a very different way to my education because obviously last year was A levels. It was very focused. You had lots of work to do. There was not much free time, so it was very much getting focused on that. Which didn't leave me much time for my racing life, which was a bit of a blow to me because I was like, oh, I've got all this work to do and I've got basically no time to do any sim practice, do any media for my racing. Test days, I couldn't do as much because of just the sheer amount of work I had for that. Whereas with Luff, of course, since we're only there 2 weeks a month, and no Fridays either. It links in very well with my racing. It's allowed me more time to do my sim practice, media. It's allowed me to train more fitness wise, and increase my fitness a lot. And that again coincides with the partners like Porsche Human Fitness. They came in last block and did half a day with us, assessing our physical attributes. And it's certainly an eye opener for me that. But yeah, no, it's been a really good and positive experience so far, and it's linked in perfectly with sort of where I want to go in life.
Perfect. And you mentioned the step from juniors to seniors. What was kind of the biggest challenge for you there, and how did you find that compared to the step from karting to cars in the first place?
Yeah, it's certainly a lot different. So the biggest change for me when I was going from karts to juniors was just the gearbox for me and the way of braking. So in a kart, you just slam the brakes on, that's it, done. Don't have to worry about gears, only one gear. We change gear ratios sometimes, but it was just throttle brake steering, that's it. Whereas adding the change of the clutch and having to change gear and thinking about what gear you need to be in for each corner was certainly quite a tough experience at first, and sort of just assessing what was right for what corner because sometimes you'd be like you could go to second, but it's really high revs. That's not going to work. So it's better just to keep it in a slightly higher gear. It won't accelerate quite as much, but you won't lose that time changing to that gear if you drop down one more. So that was probably the biggest step for me and biggest learning step for me when going from karts to juniors. Um, but for the move from juniors to seniors, for me, it was probably just the difference in pace between the two different cars. So in the juniors, when we were at Donington, I was hitting, I think, 105 downhill, flat out. Whereas in the seniors, I was hitting sort of 124 at Snetterton on a flat straight. So um, that was certainly a big difference. Having to adjust, like in a junior, you could just slam the throttle on, no wheel spin, it'd be fine. Even in the wet, you could get away with it. Whereas in the senior, you very much had to sort of feed the throttle in, which was certainly at first a big problem for me because I'd just be slamming the throttle on and you just wheel spin and go wide on the exit of the corner. So that was certainly a big struggling point for me, was the throttle application at first. Another big difference would be the braking for me from juniors to seniors, because the juniors don't use specific like race brake kit, whereas the seniors have a proper race brake kit on the front two wheels. So it's a full brake disc, caliper, and pads, which means the distance you can stop in, we're going from like 130 to 70 in the same time it takes a junior to go from 100 to 70. So that was certainly a big point for me. And the cornering speed as well. Whereas the Mark 6 Junior I drove, could sort of just keep it pinned everywhere. It wasn't really much of a struggle to get it turned in. Whereas with the Senior, which had full slick racing tyres, it would turn in much quicker. So you had sort of adjust where you turn in, because in the Junior you sort of had to preempt the turn in because it would understeer a bit on the semi-slick tyres they run, whereas slick tyres they gripped up so quickly. It was a big learning curve of how to use slicks. And for also when like straight out of the pit lane you got cold slicks, realizing that they have no grip whatsoever. So on a junior with the semis you could literally just go out and like first lap just be going straight for it, whereas the slick tires you sort of had to build up, get the tire temp and get everything sorted. At first, I didn't really realise that. I remember my first test day, I had an instructor in the car, and we went out the pit lane at Silverstone. I turned in, rear tyre temp had no temperature, and it just snapped on me, and I nearly put us into the pit wall barrier on exit, which he wasn't too pleased about, it's fair to say. But over the course of the year, I've learned how to sort of manage those tyres and build up the temperature and keep them in that window. But yeah, no, those would be the main points for me.
I was really intrigued to kind of find out what the car is like to drive because I've driven a Fiesta road car, but that's a completely different kettle of fish. And I was curious because obviously you're 17. Have you got your road license? Like, have you had to kind of learn to drive like, off track on the actual roads, or have you not started that yet?
No, I have actually got my license already. So there was one key thing. The day I turned 17, actually, and I was allowed to get on the road, I immediately, because we already had a car for the road, and we've got a little Mini One, which we managed to find secondhand. But my mum sort of just took that as her car until I could get until I was old enough to drive it. But on my 17th birthday, we just went for a drive around the country roads where we live. Um, but for me, I've sort of compartmentalized sort of the racing aspect compared to driving on the road. So I didn't find it too much because like a lot of people struggle because they're learning how to drive a car while learning the rules of the road. Whereas to me, it was sort of just learning what you need to do on the road and not having to learn how to drive a car. Um, so my parents still made me take lessons. There's a guy in our village who did lessons. They said, no, you are having lessons. We're not just letting you go for your test. So that was one thing. It was fair. It was really helpful. He's helped me a lot. And he about 6 weeks after I turned 17, managed to take my license test to get my license. And passed and fine. I got my license now, and I that's how I commute to Loughborough now.
Love that. I'm still trying to get my license in learning in a Fiesta. So if you have any tips, let me know. I was going to ask as well, because you've been with Jam Sports for the past couple of seasons now. What's it like working with them? What made you decide to kind of stick with them going forward?
Yeah, no, Jam Sport have been very backing of my career, it's fair to say. So, obviously last year, the team boss, he also does instructor work for Jam Sport. So he'd taken a little bit of a liking to me, so he was helping me out quite a lot, with coaching and stuff like that. And obviously from second place, he's given us, quite a good deal team fees wise. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we wouldn't have been able to do a full season without that financial backing from the team. And certainly recently they've been helping me a lot, with sort of plans for next season. So testing wise, we've been testing a new car, been getting acquainted with that car. But they've been giving us deals for testing so I can get out more often and get used to the car ahead of next season. And yeah, no, they've been really backing of me, and like I probably wouldn't have won the championship without them because at first they had a car, wasn't the greatest car, but that's the only one they had. But the team owner's son, he's one of the mechanics for Jam Sport. He worked on a car for another team, that they were selling that car, and he knew that it was a really top condition car and was racing at the front of the field last year. And when we were at the media day at Snetterton for TCR, he came up to me, and my dad and said, I've seen this car for sale. It's a really good deal. It's like 10 grand less than what other people are charging for their cars. And since he worked on it himself, he knows it's a really good car because he built it, he serviced it, he ran it before, so he knows that it's a really top car. And through Jam Sport, they managed to get us that car, and we made a deal with them for team fees, so they get the car at the end of the 2 years. So at the beginning of this year, we were planning on doing 2 years for the Fiestas, but having won the championship this year, we're aiming to move to a different category and different race series. We're still trying to get sponsors for that because it's still a big step up financially for us. And we've only just been able to do this year financially, and even this year's been a struggle for us. So we're currently in sponsor talks, and we've got a few which are sort of interested. But yeah, no, it's certainly tough. But yeah, no, Jam sort of have been able to back me this season financially and coaching wise as well. They've been great as well when it comes to spannering the car. So I've had quite a few mechanical problems throughout the year, which even like some of the good teams within Fiesta Seniors would struggle. So I've had a few engines go like on the weekend, and they've been able to get me out 2 hours later for the next race, with a new engine. So what they've been able to do this year, sort of the spannering side and keeping the car going, has been amazing.
I was going to ask about kind of the financial side of it and the sponsorship side of it, because I think it's something that people have really started to talk about, especially in the past couple of years, just how expensive it is to do motorsport. What's kind of been your experience of finding sponsors, finding that support? Obviously, you've had Jam Sport there to give you that support. In terms of finding other sponsors and everything, has that been a challenge for you?
Yeah, no, it's certainly a big challenge because a lot of companies aren't really interested in sort of backing a motorsport driver, because a lot of companies, first of all, some of them just don't have money to just dump into a racing driver, first of all. So you have to find sort of a really big company that has that sort of spare money to just put away into a racing driver and list it as advertising. But the same problem is that if you go for sort of a big company, they'll just say, well, for the same money, I can just put an advertisement out on Sky, for example. So trying to sell that to a big company is a very hard point, and sort of finding people that are interested. So sort of the way we've done it with current sponsors that are interested is, my dad's sort of been linking in with the CEOs of companies on LinkedIn, finding people who have an interest in motorsport or like go watch races. And the key thing is sort of finding key members of a company who are interested in racing, talking with them, and then seeing if they're interested in taking that to sort of their marketing and PR department. So I think on Tuesday we've got a meeting with a company, with the CEO, marketing and PR, to discuss sort of what we can do and what they'd expect. But yeah, no, it's certainly a hard point. I think it's one point in motorsport that people don't really consider when they're looking at motorsport. They see the racing side, they see how cool it is, but they never really consider how much it takes to put a car onto that grid and how much work it takes.
Absolutely. And am I right in thinking the course at Loughborough kind of goes into kind of the business side of it as well, which I imagine must be helpful?
Yeah, so on the course, we will be looking at. We haven't yet. We've been focusing more on driver development, sort of where we've been starting. So we've had the introduction to esports course, health and well-being for sports. We've had a couple of days at iZone Performance. We've had Porsche Human Fitness come in and do half a day with us for training our bodies and fitness. Recently, we did a endurance race as part of the college. So esports team, we have three sims now in the base room, and we did a hosted race. We made three different teams between the first and second years, and we competed in a 7 hour and 20 minute race over the course of a day, doing full drive changes, strategy, everything. But certainly a lot of good practice there. But I think later on in the course, I think it's more focused for the second years. They will do more sort of the actual engineering, going to the workshops, working on cars, and sort of more the sponsor side.
That's really interesting and also sounds a lot more fun than A levels. I
Yeah,
wanted
no,
to
certainly.
speak to you a bit about some of the tracks that you race on. We've mentioned quite a few so far throughout. I'm very biased towards Donington because of how close it is to where I live. I wanted to kind of ask you about just like the tracks that you drive across the UK and what they're like to drive. And do you have a particular favorite as well?
Yeah, so obviously I've been quite a few different circuits with this year's calendar. So we started off at Brands Hatch Indy Circuit, which is a small circuit, but it's quite good for racing because it doesn't really allow anybody to get away with long straights or anything. So qualifying was very close. I think like the first weekend, like the top 10 was split by only about 3/10 of a second. So that promoted very like close and good racing. Then we went to Snetterton 300, which is a much longer circuit. Qualifying differences were slightly larger, so I think there like the top 10 was split by about 6/10. So there's more time to find in different corners, and I have to say Snetterton was one of my favorite circuits, just because of the complexity of everything. So you got lots of like trail break zones going under the bridge, quite a technical circuit, but that's what I really enjoy. And then after that was Alton Park on the Island circuit. I'm a really big fan of Alton. It's where I did my third test in a junior, so it's um, really, really fun circuit. Wasn't my favourite layout of Alton Park, the island layout. I much prefer the international, but still was a really fun circuit to race at. It's actually where I got my first class win, so yeah, it's a really important circuit for me and one of my favourites. After that was Croft, which was probably one of the scarier ones on the calendar for me, because of high speed corners where you've got tyre stacks on the apex and you're getting sort of an inch away from these tyre stacks doing 105 miles an hour flat out through this corner. It was quite nerve-wracking, particularly since it rained that weekend as well. So very low visibility through very fast corners, quite bumpy circuit as well. So that was certainly one of my less favourite circuits. Still fun to race on and promote good racing, but it wasn't my favourite on the calendar. After that was Silverstone National, home of motorsport. Certainly not my favourite layout of Silverstone, but I'd already raced there before. It's where I had my first race weekend, so I was sort of hoping for a better weekend there. Started out well. I had my best qualifying there with third overall, first in class, so started off well, but bad luck struck again with two mechanical failures on Sunday, which just put me at the back of the grid. So again, Silverstone National not being sort of the best circuit for me. After that, we went to Thruxton, which was a new circuit for championship. So they hadn't been there since 2018. So it's been a long time since anybody's raced there. And because of that, sort of nobody in the championship, so sort of the older people who have been there and done like sort of like 10 years, or some people have done over 10 years in the championship, and they just know the circuits like the back of their hand. Whereas with Thruxton, since we haven't been there for ages, nobody really knew what it was going to be like in those cars since they've changed so much. So it meant that there's a very even playing field. Um, And that was, again, I really enjoyed the circuit. It was quite scary since there are only actually two places you actually break on the circuit. Everywhere else is either a lift or just completely flat, even in the seniors, which was certainly quite scary for me, being so close to people. Like down the back straight, we were hitting 130 miles an hour going into the last chicane. So certainly a hard circuit, but that's probably one of the most important circuits to me because it's where I took an overall win and three overall podiums over the course of a weekend and won each race in class. So that's the best weekend I've had this year. So that circuit means quite a lot to me. And then Silverstone International was final weekend, which wasn't too long ago actually. Um, was a decent weekend actually, to be fair, for the final weekend. It was quite cool being in the garages in the main paddock where all the F1 cars go. Um, so it was certainly an amazing atmosphere, an amazing circuit and layout to be on. But again, nobody had been there for a while, so it was sort of a more even playing field. We actually got a grid walk on that weekend as well, so that was a new experience. Being just standing out on the grid with my car on display was quite a cool experience. And to be able to round the championship up off there was an amazing feeling.
That's really cool. In terms of your favorite race of the season, even if it's not results based, like kind of just the whether it's like the atmosphere, like the track itself, what would you say is the standout highlight for you?
For me, it would probably be Silverstone the final weekend to be able to win a championship there at such a prestigious circuit. It was an unreal feeling, to be honest. To be able to race on a circuit I know F1 drivers are, to be able to do a grid walk on where F1 cars did a grid walk, it was a yeah, no, it's an unreal feeling to be able to round off and win a championship at that circuit.
Yeah, that's really cool. And to be able to say, yeah, as you said, you've raced on the same track as F1 drivers is always a very, very cool thing to be able to say. I wanted to ask a bit more about going forward, looking to the future, because I know you won the AM class. There's obviously the pro class as well within the championship. I also saw on Instagram that you've been testing a mini lately. So I just kind of wanted to ask, like, kind of what's on the horizon for you? What are you looking towards now?
So yeah, so as I said, we won the AM Championship this year. Our initial plan at the beginning of the year was to do AMs this year, then do the pro category next year, after gaining the experience. But given the success we've had this year, which was sort of came out of nowhere for us, we were sort of expecting to be mid pack for the entire season. So yeah, we've had my first test day in a mini JCW Sport, which was quite a productive day. Was pretty much on pace from the people racing it this year, just straight off first test day, which is quite promising. And that's sort of where we're looking to be next year. So if we can get the sponsors to go there, we'd be looking to do mini JCW Sport next year. And if next year goes well and we do manage to get on that grid, we'd be looking to go to full JCW grid the year after. And the ultimate goal would be sort of British touring cars. That's where I'd sort of love to end up. But if I had sort of like a one-off race outside of that, I'd say to be able to do like Daytona or Le Mans would sort of be like the dream because to race at such a prestigious event like that, and if you win it, then yeah, no, your name goes down in history if you win at Le Mans or Daytona. So yeah, no, if us outside of British touring cars, if I could do those two races, that would sort of be the dream.
In terms of touring cars, I mean, it speaks for itself. It's such a good racing series for fans and drivers alike. I think like you can tell how much the drivers love doing it, which I think makes it not like even more special to watch as a fan. Are there any kind of particular drivers from touring cars who've inspired you, who you look up to, who you like kind of even if you take things from their driving style or from their attitude towards it?
Yeah, so for touring car drivers, I'd say one key person for me would be Tom Ingram, currently with in my Hyundai, because he did the Loughborough course as well, and he also came from a very similar background with me, with not a whole lot of money to go racing. So he's quite an important figure for me in touring cars, because I'm doing the same course as him, come from a similar background. So he's sort of showing me that even someone from my background can make it into quite a prestigious series. Another person for me would be Jake Hill, this year's champion. Because again, he came from a background with very little money, and he got picked up and got taken to touring cars. And again, it just shows that even if you don't have a whole lot of money, if you have the talent and you can prove that to the right people and get the right people on board, you can still make a career out of motorsport.
Absolutely. I think, especially this year, those two drivers have been next level. Watching their kind of title fight this year was so exciting. And yeah, as you said, they both came from, quite humble beginnings and have gone on to do brilliant things. Is there anyone who's kind of driven in the more endurance side that you look up to, whether it's Le Mans or Daytona, any other kind of endurance racer?
Yeah, so for me, sort of, he didn't come from a background of endurance. So Mick Schumacher, he's quite an important figure because yes, he comes from a background of money. He didn't have the greatest history in F1, but to see him then go on and race with Alpine in WEC has been quite inspiring for me because he's had lots of negative comments said from him from his F1 career. Really didn't have a good time, never really got any good results, which was quite sort of mentally as a driver, that's quite hard. Like when you're not pulling results, I would know it's happened to me over the course of this year. So um, it must have been like sort of really hard for him being in such a harsh environment as well, because it looks all fun on the outside, but F1 is very much sort of a shark tank. So if you don't have money or the talent to be there, you will just get dumped as soon as they can dump you. So yeah, to see him then build his career back up and go to Alpine and perform at a high standard has been quite inspiring to me. To see someone go from sort of low self-esteem, thinking he can't do it, to changing his sort of career and where he is, and actually doing really well and showing that he does have talent to be a driver, just something slightly different.
Absolutely. And I think the narrative is changing and it's getting there, but there's a world outside of F1. And I think sometimes people, especially drivers who've been in F1, they forget that and they think it's F1 or nothing. But there's so much brilliant motorsport that you can do outside of F1. And I think Mick's a great example of that, that just because F1 doesn't work out doesn't mean it's the end.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because obviously, F1 being such a big sport now, and always has been, to be fair, you see a lot of young drivers and sort of parents of really young drivers thinking like, oh, they're going to be the next Lewis Hamilton, the next Max Verstappen, and really obsessed with getting their kid to F1. You can sometimes see a lot of drivers forget sort of money and financial decisions you need to do to be able to get there. So like Lando Norris, his dad spent in the realm of about 17 million getting him through the junior series till he got an F1 seat. And there's not many people do get an F1 seat at the end of the year because nowadays you see drivers staying in longer and not leaving as quickly. So the seats that come available each year are just dropping lower and lower as people stay in longer. So you see lots of F2 drivers, like each year the F2 champion, you rarely see them actually get into F1. And since they've won the championship, they can't stay in F2 and try and do it again. They have to then go off and try and find another series where they can still bring good results on a competitive grid, which is really hard. So for me, obviously, yeah, no, F1's cool and all that, but realistically, from where I am, we're not a billion. My dad's not a billionaire who can just pay for me to get there or pay for a seat. So being realistic with where you can go will get you a lot further than sort of having super high ambitions of getting to F1. Because all that will happen is you'll just get thrown down. You'll go up this path of single seater racing, but you won't make it anywhere. Because at the end of that sort of career path, if you don't end up in sort of F1 or IndyCar, single seater wise, you're just not going to get paid, and all that money you've put into it is just going to go. Whereas sort of the sports car racing industry, yes, again, not a huge amount of people get paid to do it, but the sort of the ratio of people who get paid in the single seater realm, apart from F1 and IndyCar, compared to how many people in sports car racing who aren't in prototypes and stuff like that, is much higher. So even like GT3 and GT4 drivers, some of them will be getting paid. So Jem Hepworth, actually know her. So my grandpa's friend is her mother. So so yeah, and sort of seeing her career path, it just shows that even if you're not at the top of sports car racing, you can still make a career out of it and live off it. So on the Loughborough course is another good example. We have Will Tregurtha for esports. He's done GT4 Europe, British GT, and it just shows like within sports car racing, you don't have to be at the very top to have a career out of it. Whereas in single seaters, you have to be at the top if you want to make a career realistically of it. So you have to basically be F1, Super Formula, or IndyCar, and those are basically the only three that you can get paid for. And even in Super Formula or IndyCar, most of them still don't get paid for it. Most of them still have to pay for their seat or bring sponsors in for it. So yeah, no, I'd say main thing for young racing drivers who don't have millionaire parent dads or billionaire parent dads is set your expectations high, want to get the most out of yourself, but at the same time, you need to have a sense of realism within there to say, yes, I'd love to get to F1, but if I want to make a career out of racing, this is realistically a better plan for where we can go. And that's what me and my family and Jan sort of tried to say is realistically, with your talent, financial backing, and everything in your career, where can you realistically end up and make a career out of motorsport? And I'd say for all young racing drivers, that's probably the most important thing.
Absolutely. And honestly, with that mindset, especially at such a young age, touring cars, Le Mans, Daytona, whatever you're looking at, I honestly feel like I'm expecting to see you there. Genuinely, I'm excited for your future and for your career. So best of luck with 2025 and beyond. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been amazing to hear your motorsport journey.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.